There we go. Dan, how are you?
Hi, sorry about that.
No,
I'm
it's all
challenged in these ways.
yeah, it's good to see your face. It's obviously we haven't been able to see it on TV for a little bit, but we're glad that you were able to join us today.
It's my pleasure. I wish I could be on TV one day soon, but we all got to do what we're supposed to do and fight the fight. And hopefully there'll be baseball at some point, but happy to be with you.
Yeah, that's great. So the first question I have for you is, how did you start off in broadcasting, and what made you kind of want to travel down that road?
That's a long answer. I'll give you as short an answer as I can to that. So I was at Western Ontario, University of Western Ontario, now known as Western University. Was a math major, and right in my first week of school decided I wanted to do some extracurricular stuff. Wanted to go write for the campus newspaper, the Gazette, but there was a big line. So walked by a door that said Radio Western, knocked on the door, walked in. Do you guys need volunteers? Yeah. Do you do sports? Yeah. And I started kind of just horsing around on the side of at the radio station there. Did some football, did some basketball, did a talk show. Graduated with a degree in actuarial science. Worked for a while as an actuary. Really was not planning on getting into broadcasting at all, but a few months later decided I wasn't enjoying what I was doing and wanted to give it a try, and sent out a bunch of cassettes, a bunch of demo tapes, and got a job in Barrie, and eventually got a job in Toronto at what is now the Fan, and just kind of worked hard and got lucky. Somebody at TSN heard me, and I eventually auditioned and got the job as the Blue Jays guy. Somebody at ESPN heard me, and it's a long story. I'm shortening it quite a bit, but kind of fell into this sideways. Never really thought that this is something I'd be doing.
And that's great. And obviously, it's been something that you've had fun doing because you've done it for the past 25 years, which we'll touch on shortly. But over your career of broadcasting, you've covered the Jays, as you mentioned. You've covered NHL, NCAA basketball, even the 1994 Olympics. Throughout all of the events that you've covered, what made you want to try and cover sports over anything else, really?
I've been a sports junkie my whole life. So, but when I actually got into radio at the beginning in Barrie, I was a newscaster, sportscaster. Did the markets and the courts and elections, did whatever there was to do. But I always wanted to be in sports, and just was extremely lucky that at the time I was getting into the business, CJCL was turning into the Fan and becoming an all sports station. So I'm a big believer, especially now, that you should do something that you love. You should find something that you really enjoy for work. And sports, I'm kind of a one-trick pony. Sports is what I love.
Now, out of all of the events that you've seen, what has been your most favorite event to call for?
That's a good question. As you said, I was at the Olympics. I was really young. I was only 27 when I went to the Olympics. Did hockey for CTV back at the '94 Olympics. That was a thrill. I've been able to do the World Series on ESPN Radio the last 9 years. That's a thrill. And college basketball for ESPN, a lot of Duke Carolina games, Kansas games, Kentucky games. It's hard for me to separate it into just one. If you forced me to pick, I would probably say it's doing the World Series on ESPN Radio. To do championships is very special. I love baseball. I love baseball on the radio. It's the World Series. So I'd probably say the World Series that I've been able to do would be number one.
Nice. And yeah, I mean, World Series is top notch, right? It's definitely a crazy environment. Going kind of focusing towards the Jays and the 2015, 2016 kind of years that they had. What a couple of years it was. I know for me, I had season seats. I was there during the Bautista bat flip, and it was just crazy to be able to see what happens from a fan perspective in a packed stadium. What was your kind of most memorable moment in 2015 during those playoffs to call when the Jays were in there?
Yeah, you cut out just a little bit, but in 2015, I did some of the Jays playoff games for ESPN Radio. I did the bat flip game totally by fluke. I was doing the Cubs and Cardinals on ESPN Radio, and a guy named Dave Fleming, a terrific broadcaster, was doing the Jays and Rangers series. And then somebody who was supposed to do a college football game, I think, got sick, and Dave got pulled off Game 5 of Toronto, Texas to do a college football game. And only because the Cub Cardinal series ended the night before, my radio boss called me and said, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, well, I'm going to the Blue Jay game. He goes, do you want to work the Blue Jay game? So I wound up working the Bautista game. Didn't know about it until like midnight the night before. Obviously loved it, being from Toronto. My parents were at the game. Two of my sons were at the game. And it was a thrill to do that. And then went on and did the Kansas City series on ESPN radio as well. And it was a really good series. I mean, the Blue Jays were a great team that year, but Kansas City was the best team. If the Blue Jays and Royals play that series 10 times, the Jays probably win it 3 or 4 times, but not that year, not that time. Kansas City just executed better, played better. But it was so much fun. I mean, again, being from Toronto, I'd be lying if I said that it's not a little bit extra special to cover a team from my hometown that, you know, that family members and friends love and I grew up watching and that sort of thing. So doing the Blue Jays in the playoffs in 2015 was one of the highlights, and that Bautista bat flip game especially.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, it was a crazy wild time just to be there watching the game, let alone having to call. It would have been something beyond anything else. We had a question coming in the comments asking that if you could be any current MLB player, who would you play like the most?
Wow, I've never been asked that question. If I could be a current player, well, I think I'd want to play center field or shortstop, be a really athletic guy, and I think I'd want to be a guy who hustles and loves the game. I might pick a guy like Francisco Lindor of the Indians. I love him. I think he's very special. I love the way he plays the game. But I'll tell you, if you ask me in a year, it might be Bo Bichette. I'm an enormous Bo Bichette fan. I think Bo Bichette's going to be a tremendously special player. And I love the way that he goes about his business, too. So Lindor and Bichette, I think would be the first two that come to mind.
Now, talking about young guns, we actually had another question coming from a fan of the show asking about Nate Pearson. And where do you think Nate Pearson will fit in the 2020 or 2021 rotation?
Well, let's assume there is a 2020. Let's say we get going, you know, July or whatever, and there's a 3 to 4 month season. He might spend a little bit of time in the minors because he's barely pitched at AAA, and there might still be some service time issues where they decide to keep him down for a little bit. But he'll be a Blue Jay in 2000, you know, barring an injury or something like that. He'll be a Blue Jay this year if there is baseball this year. And I think very quickly he'll move to the top of the rotation, whether it's 1 or 2 because of Hyun-Jin Ryu. We'll see. But I actually did a thing with Danny Jansen for the Blue Jays today, did a similar thing to this with Danny Jansen, and asked him about him. And he said, like, everybody knows he throws 101, but his slider, changeup, and curveball are pretty good too. Like, he's not just a thrower. He has enormous upside, enormous potential, and has a chance to be the Blue Jays' best starting pitcher shortly after he gets to the major leagues. You just hope he stays healthy and we get to see him realize all that potential.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting to see where we were at just 4 or 5 years ago with that 2015, 2016, even 2017 roster, and then how everything's curveball into what we have now, where we're relying so much on our young guys like Bo Bichette, like Nate Pearson, and even like Vladimir Guerrero, or Jr., sorry. Who has been kind of your most interesting prospect to kind of watch or pay attention to as of late?
That's a great question, and I should just pick one. Like, Vladdy is the obvious answer because of the hype and the numbers that he put up in the minor leagues. I've already told you. Oops, what just happened here? Oh, I flipped it around somehow. There we go. I've already talked a little bit about Bo. I think he's got an unbelievable career ahead of him, like unbelievable. You know, could win batting titles, multiple-time All-Star. You know, that good. But the other two guys, I'm really intrigued by Gurriel and Biggio too, and they sometimes get left out. I'm a big believer in Gurriel. We haven't seen a full season of Gurriel yet, and if he can stay healthy, you know, really get comfortable in left field, and if he can just lay off pitches out of the zone a little bit more, he's got the chance to put up big numbers because the ball comes off his bat like a rocket. And I'm a big Cavan Biggio fan. Firstly, I'm a big Cavan Biggio, the person, fan. And I'm a big Cavan Biggio, the player, fan, too. I don't know that he's ever going to, you know, hit 280, 300, anything like that. He might be a 240 or 250 hitter. But if he can hit 25 homers, and if he can steal 20 or 25 bases, and if he can walk over 100 times, which I think he can do, that's a pretty good player. That's a guy with a good on-base percentage, good slugging percentage, a good OPS. He's a left-handed batter. He's got defensive versatility. Looks like he'll spend a lot of time at second base, but as things evolve, who knows? And he's an A-plus guy in the clubhouse, like A-plus. So I'm excited, for if you want to call them the core four, whatever you want to call them. I'm excited for all of them. To be honest with you, I'm curious to see what all of them can do if they can ever stay healthy and we can get a full season of baseball at some point.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely something to kind of have your hopes towards, especially with what's happening. And for the lack of sports that's happening, just wanting to get back. But now that's going to add to the excitement of it all as well. Now, going back to you, you've worked obviously with so many people in your career. You've worked with guys like Buck Martinez, Dick Vitale, Jay Belias, if I'm probably pronouncing that so poorly, so my apologies. But also Joe Morgan and Aaron Boone. Who has been your favorite person to work with thus far in the booth?
Yeah. I don't know that I could ever pick one. I've been lucky to work with so many people. I actually keep like a little Word document of all the people I've worked with just for fun. And between basketball and baseball, I think I've got over 50 people on there between Canadian TV and American TV as well. For college basketball, Dick Vitale and Jay Billis are the two that I've worked with the most. And they're both great. They're both absolutely fantastic, as good as it gets, very different, but both as good as it gets. And then for baseball, to work, I worked with Buck when I started at TSN in 1995, and all these years later, I'm working with Buck again. And working with Tabby is great too. I mean, you're not going to meet a nicer guy. And then for baseball, to work with an Aaron Boone, with an Oral Hershiser, with a Terry Francona, you mentioned Joe Morgan. I've been so fortunate over the years, just with Rick Sutcliffe. I mean, there are so many others. The more I name, the more I worry about who I'm leaving out. But I've been so fortunate. I've learned from all of them. Way back when I was Tony Gwynn's partner for 2 years. I was David Justice's partner for a year on ESPN. And I know a lot of the folks in Canada would never have seen any of that stuff. But I've been blessed. I really have. And I can call a lot of them friends. Unfortunately, we lost Tony Gwynn too early, the late, great Tony Gwynn. But I've learned from all of them. I've enjoyed all of them. And I hope they've enjoyed working with me.
We had another question come in the comments saying, what is one game you would make a non-baseball fan watch to make them fall in love with the sport?
That's a good question. The Bautista bat flip game is not a bad place to start, although it was so crazy that seventh inning. I'll tell you a game that I did that it's not going to mean anything, I think, but there was a one-game playoff between, I want to say, the Twins and the Tigers. I believe that every inning somebody had a chance to win it. Somebody got thrown out of the plate, or somebody turned a great double play, or made a shoestring catch, or it was one of those games. And it was a one-game playoff to decide who goes to the playoffs. So it was a tremendously exciting game. I'd say that one. The bat flip game would be good. And you could do worse too. I did the Cubs and Indians World Series in 2016. You could do worse than Game 7 of the Cubs and Indians, with so much on the line, with the Cubs finally snapping their curse at over 100 years. So those would be three that I think I would pick.
Okay, good to know. Out of the players that you've kind of been able to watch, either talk to, things like that, is there one player that stands out in your mind that you look to more than the rest because either of gameplay, personality, off the field or off the court, etc.?
Well, when I broke in doing the Blue Jays back in 1995, I was really young and I didn't know what I didn't know. I needed to learn a lot. And there was a group of players who were really good to me and took care of me. Guys like Paul Quantrill, Pat Hentgen, Dan Plesac, Carlos Delgado, Sean Green. It was a really good group. And I owe those guys a big thank you for the help they gave me. My favorite player growing up, for the older people on here, was Willie Upshaw, who was a really good Blue Jay back in the 80s. I was a big fan of the way that he went about his business. He was quiet, never talked about himself, never brought attention to himself, but just played the game the right way. I think I like guys who play the game hard, play the game the right way. The game has changed. You see a lot more personality in the game than you did 20, 30 years ago. Things have changed a fair bit, but it's hard for me to pick out just one. My all-time favorite player is George Brett, who loved his swing, loved his hustle, loved his competitiveness. Hall of Famer, 3 batting titles, almost hit 400 one year. I'd say George Brett and Don Mattingly are probably my 2 favorite players ever. And they were both players that I admired the way that they played. I've gotten a chance to interview Brett a couple of times, and I got a chance to know Mattingly reasonably well when he was the manager of the Dodgers, and of course still is the manager of the Marlins. So I would say those would be 2 guys I would put above anybody else.
Now, you just spoke about like who you would look up to, but has there been also someone that's inspired you, either off the field, in the broadcasting world, in your personal life, that you look up to the most outside of sport?
Well, in my personal life, I would have to say my parents. I was blessed with great parents who thankfully are still healthy and safe during all this, and I got a chance to see them from a distance today, so
That's great.
that's nice. As a broadcaster, I was a huge Tom Cheek fan. Am a huge Tom Cheek fan, but Tom did games from '77. I don't remember the last year, 2004, 5, somewhere in there. And getting a chance to meet Tom and eventually kind of work alongside Tom a little bit, be in the broadcast booth, do the pre and post game shows for a few years back in the '90s. Meeting Tom was as big to me as meeting any athlete. It really was. So when I get asked about broadcasters, I bring up Tom a lot. And if I'm talking to people in the U.S., they may not know who he is, but he's a Hall of Famer, and I must have listened to thousands of games that Tom called. So he's somebody that stands out in my mind.
Awesome. And talking about Hall of Fame, I consider it a Hall of Fame award, or so do so many others. And in 2011, you were actually named the National Sportscaster of the Year by the National Sportscaster and Sports Writer Association. Not only is it an honor to win like that award just on any given year, but you were also the first Canadian born announcer to be honored with the award. What was it like when you got the call saying that you were the recipient of the award, and just like that meaning behind it?
It was overwhelming, to be honest with you. And again, it's not something I think that a lot of people in Canada would be familiar with, but it's a U.S. award, and finalist, and I never even considered that I might actually win the award. And then they called me. It was right around New Year's Day when they called me and said, "Congratulations, you won the award." And I was totally overwhelmed. And they had a wonderful ceremony. That they have the national sports writer and national sportscaster, and then they put one writer and one sportscaster in their Hall of Fame every year. So there were 4 honorees, and it was down in North Carolina. And some family joined me down there, and I actually flew down 2 bosses of mine from the old CJCL fan days, 2 guys who really gave me my start. One of them introduced me, Alan Davis, he was the program director. Scott Metcalf was the news director, and they both helped me a ton. So, winning that award is still something that kind of seems not real, so a little surreal sometimes, but it was a wonderful honor.
That's incredible. So I just want to say congratulations. I know it's been obviously a number of years, and it feels like it could be so long ago, but at the same time, everyone still talks about it, and it's a huge accomplishment for sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
We had another question that came in, and if you had to give advice to someone that wanted to start off in broadcasting, either in sports or in just a general broadcast field, what kind of tips and advice would you give that person?
First of all, don't do it the way that I. Glamorous, it's fun, this, that. Yes, it can be, but there is a lot of, I've been very fortunate to get where I've gotten, and a lot of hard work, a lot of behind the scenes stuff, a lot of good fortune and good luck went into that as well. Be prepared to really, really work hard. My son is in a broadcasting program at Syracuse University right now, and he's always wanted to do it. He and I had a long talks before he decided to pursue it, and I said, like, you've got to understand how hard you're going to have to work and how many people will be in the program, and everybody's going to be trying to separate themselves from the herd. You got to work hard, and the other thing is you got to make sacrifices. You got to work nights, you got to work weekends. Maybe you have to move to a different town. Like I started in Barrie, as I mentioned. I was lucky. I know people who started in Kapuskasing and or went all over the country, started wherever they had to get, wherever the job was, in an effort to get where they wanted to go. If you're looking for staying in your hometown and working 9 to 5, broadcasting is not for you. You got to be flexible. You got to make sacrifices, and it can be really fun. It can be frustrating at times too. I know a lot of people who were in it and kind of dropped out eventually and went into something else because they didn't get as far as they wanted to get, or they couldn't make a decent enough living doing it. You've got to work hard. You got to have a little luck on your side too.
Gotcha. Before we let you go, is there anything else that you want to share, favorite memory or any kind of words before we let you go today?
I would just say, how lucky I am to have worked on to have done everything that I've done. The ESPN stuff has been wonderful, but since I'm speaking, I presume to Canadians here, that I would say how fortunate I feel to have been able to cover my hometown team. Like I said, sometimes you got to move and you never know what kind of job you're going to get. And to be able to call Blue Jays games is really, something that I don't take for granted, and something that I appreciate a great deal and hope I'll continue to do it for a number of years. And then outside of broadcasting, just everybody, we're all going through a tough time right now, and I hope everybody's doing okay and isolating, and one day this will all be over, and whether it's a new normal or the old normal, we'll get back to something more normal than we're doing now. So just hang in there, everybody, and hopefully it won't be too much longer.
And before we let you go, we actually just had another question come through asking that because you've been able to travel through Canada and through the States, and you've tried so many different foods. We are around dinner time right about now.
Yeah.
Which city has the best food that you've tasted?
Well, I'm a notoriously picky eater. I eat like an 8-year-old, and I'm not exaggerating. So I'm not the best to ask a foodie question. I would say Chicago is my favorite city for 2 reasons. I love a good steak, and there are some great steakhouses in Chicago. And although I can't eat very much of it, I love deep dish pizza. I love all pizza, but I love deep dish pizza. And after 2 slices, you're ready to just keel over and go to sleep for about a week. But I love Chicago deep dish pizza. So I think Chicago would probably be my first choice.
All right. Well, that sounds like a great plan. I still have to go to Chicago, so that is the first place I'm going to go when I get there.
All right. Great time.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate the time. And again, hope everyone on your end stays safe, stays healthy, and we hope to see you again on TV soon.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Ryan. Thanks for asking me.
Have a good day.
You too.
All right, everyone. Thank you again for joining another week of the From the Stands, the Cool Picks show. That again was Dan Shulman from ESPN and from the Jays. Appreciate all the love and support and all of the questions as always. We'll be doing it week after week. So tune in again next week and we will see you then. Take care.